Hey everyone, welcome to My Final Play. I'm here on location at the Hotel Hershey in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I'm here with former UFC fighter Charlie Brenneman. Charlie, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure. You smell the chocolate in the air, right?
Yes, you can. So we're going to get into the sport of fighting, UFC in particular, and kind of just walk us through what that journey looked like to get to where you were at the top level of fighting.
Yeah, let me start from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I had wrestled my entire life, which is a huge component of the sport. You know, UFC is the organization, mixed martial arts is the sport. Mm-hmm. Wrestling is one of those mixed martial arts, so it's a variety of it. For me, it was. I grew up, Rocky is my hero. My entire life, it was like that transitioned into wrestling. Mm-hmm. And then when wrestling was over, it was like, initially it was like, I'm done with this. I don't want this anymore. I don't want to cut weight. I don't want to work hard. I don't want to get up early. And then like a year into it, I was like, this kind of stinks. This is not fun anymore. I really wish I had that life again.
Yeah.
And I did it. I always say like I did a self-audit. Mm-hmm. Basically like looked myself up and down and thought, what can I do? Yeah. And at that time, a friend of mine, Frankie Edgar, with whom I was, didn't wrestle with, but he was in the UFC. And I thought, well, heck, I can do that. And then literally, I wasn't thinking about that morning when I went to school. That afternoon, I went home and called my buddy and said, I'm going to fight in the UFC. And that was where it started, yeah.
So what were you doing after college, though, as far as that transition from college then to UFC?
So I was a teacher. I got a job teaching junior and senior high Spanish.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like my identity as identity is a huge thing. I had always identified myself as a wrestler, which I still do in part. But I learned for the last 10 years that it was like I identify myself as someone who loves to work hard, someone who loves to grapple and fight and wrestle and be disciplined and work hard. Yeah. That's what I love. I got rid of all that. And I was a Spanish teacher, and I ate a lot of pizza and drank a lot of Pepsi, and just didn't do much. I got bored of it pretty quick. Mm-hmm. I ran a marathon, probably a year and a half into my teaching, and that was good. But I really missed the physicality of wrestling. Right. And I was never a fighter growing up. I was scared of fighting. I suffered, I would say, more than a fair share of bullying and being on the wrong end of getting picked on. So it was never something that I thought I would actually do, but I wanted to compete so bad that wanting to compete overrode the fear of fighting.
Yeah. So how were you introduced then into the UFC other than your friend? What did that process look like?
Literally, it was starting at square zero. Your cousin's here right now. He's 15, and we were joking about what I would tell him. It's long and it's hard and it's not easy at all. I started at square one. I took a step, and there was a local gym in the area that did jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I knew nothing. I remember I watched the first Brazilian, it was probably a DVD or a tape, but I think it was a DVD, and I remember seeing the guard. Yeah. Like, what are they doing? What is this? This is supposed to be a fight. I knew nothing about jiu-jitsu. There was a gym up the mountain from where I'm from, near Johnstown, and in a small town called South Fork, and a coal town, and I just went there. Yeah. I said I want to learn to fight, and the guys there, Darcy and Dave Regala, who were huge mentors of mine, they were prison guards, prison wardens. Yeah. And I just learned, and I was terrible, but I just kept going back, and that's the advice right there. It's just the persistence, the just doggedness. I'm not going to stop.
Yeah. So how many years then did you compete?
I fought, my first amateur fight, I believe, was the November of 2006, and my last professional fight was 2014. Yeah. So 8 years.
And along the way, you became the 7th ranked in the UFC world. Yeah.
So the journey, I started that process in Hollidaysburg, PA, where I'm from, and then I learned very quickly the importance. Another piece of advice: surrounding yourself with the best. Yeah. And I wanted to be the best in the world, and it was very obvious to me that I've got to be around them on a regular basis. I'm going to learn from them. I got to fight with them. I've got to test my mettle against them. And so gradually, through training locally, I realized, all right, I got to step outside the box. I walked away from my teaching job, got a grad assistantship in East Stroudsburg. Another piece of advice: my mom, she was like, you can do whatever you want, but you got to get your master's degree. Yeah. I was like, okay, that's a fair enough deal for me. So I got my master's at East Stroudsburg, secured my teaching certificate forever, got my master's, and then it was like, I went from Hollidaysburg to East Stroudsburg, stayed there for a while, then moved over to North Jersey, and I was surrounding myself with Jim and Dan Miller, Frankie Edgar. I go into New York City, Enzo Gracie's on a regular basis. All these killers that all these Khabib, when Khabib came to Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's the best. When he came to America for the first time, he was in Jersey and we trained with him and Adlon, another killer.
Yeah.
And I just started to become one of them.
Yeah.
I just kind of learned and became that thing I wanted to become.
And that drive just never stopped.
Never stopped. It's a blessing and a curse. I think I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of asking questions. I have a podcast where I interview all kinds of people. Mm-hmm. And that thirst and that drive is my book. Actually, is called Driven, but it's a blessing and a curse because it disenables me to sit quietly often.
Yeah.
And that annoys my wife. But yeah, it just never died, and the idea is just getting back up again. I mean, literally, I was fighting, so I was getting beat up.
Yeah.
Like Frankie and a guy named Chris Ligori, who fought in one of the early UFCs. I mean, they would just toy me and beat me up and smack me and beat me up. And then Eddie Alvarez, who was another UFC champion, same thing. I would drive to Philadelphia, I'd get my butt kicked for an hour and a half, I'd drive 2 hours home, lots of driving. And a bigger lesson to that is the names that I've named: Frankie Edgar, UFC champion world, he'll be a Hall of Famer. Eddie Alvarez, UFC champion. Adlon Amlov, who could be, but he retired. But Khabib, one of the best ever, UFC champion.
Yeah.
It didn't stop. You've got to surround yourself. Jim and Dan Miller. Jim just got the record for the most wins and/or fights in the UFC.
Yeah.
These were guys that I wanted to be like.
Right.
So I just was around them.
Right. That proximity definitely was a key to it. So let's get into then the final fight.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And explain to us that situation.
You asked me if I remember that before we started recording. Yeah, I mean, it was in Brazil. It was in a small town named Uberlândia, Brazil. Mm-hmm. There's this balance between looking back and thinking I did the right thing and/or I thought I was doing the right thing.
Right.
You just don't know until after the fact. I thought my training was on key for that fight. I went down to Brazil, and it was a small town, small arena, probably I'm guessing 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. And they have a chant in Brazil. In Spanish, it's "Va morir," you're gonna die. So it sounds like that in Portuguese. But it's that's the way they say you're gonna get your butt kicked, you're gonna die. That's the literal translation. And I just remember it was so hot in that gym. It was almost like my first amateur fight, to be honest, which was in Steubenville, Ohio, which is a rough town right on the other side of the Pittsburgh side of the border. And I just remember in Brazil it was just a dark, dank environment with a hostile crowd. I was fighting a Brazilian saying you're gonna die, and it was so hot in the octagon, it was so stinking hot. And I remember I learned very quickly during that training during that fight that my training was off. It was not where it was supposed to be. I hadn't grappled enough. I felt like my core strength as a wrestler was not there. I remember he hipped into me, hipped over me, and I thought, that's not good. This guy's either stronger or I'm weaker than I normally am. And I just made a zig when I should have zagged against the fence, and he started coming around my neck, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. And I remember laying there getting choked out, and the world when you get choked out just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And I made a conscious decision, I read about it in my book, but I made a conscious decision to tap. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to go unconscious. I didn't want my mom to see me go unconscious, so I did. I made the conscious decision to tap. And I remember just thinking, it's over. It's all over. This sucks. This was not supposed to happen.
Yeah. Now, did you know going into that fight that was going to be your last?
So I'm a paradox of confidence and total lack of confidence.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm a paradox of being sure of things and totally unsure of things. And I have a really emotional side. I'm gonna say dramatic, overly dramatic sometimes, emotional. Mm-hmm. So it was I was talk about the romantic view of this or that, riding off into the sunset, winning your last fight. I was on the other side of that. Yeah. I was I can't lose. And so I was probably a little dramatic going into that fight, saying if I lose, I'm done. And then afterwards, I was I'm done. But that was emotions talking.
Yeah.
And then when I got home and those emotions kind of went away, then I was all right, what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. So I kept up my training for, I want to say about a year. kind of aimless training. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I wanted to stay sharp if I was going to fight again.
Right.
And at that time, I was conscious of brain trauma and the money that I was getting offered at that time to fight in smaller promotions after getting released again. I mean, it was peanuts.
Yeah.
And over time, it made the decision that it's going to take a lot of money for me to fight, and nobody's offering me a lot of money. Right. So by default, I just haven't flat.
Yeah. But talk about though that, and you touched on it, the transition. Once you got home, and that, what am I going to do next? What does that look like?
It was a whole restructuring of restructuring of everything. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to get up and train again, so it was wrestling all over again.
Right.
What now? And I didn't know, and I kind of did a self-audit and thought, what am I good at? What do I want to do, and what am I good at? And I love being on a stage, whether it's a fight, a wrestling mat, whatever. I love being on a stage. I love teaching and sharing. And I had been asked enough questions from people over the years to realize that, all right, my story is interesting to people, so I can tell my story. So immediately I sat down to write a book. Mm-hmm. Started that process pretty much right after I got home from Brazil in November of 2014. And then just said, all right, I'll start speaking. I learned about this industry that is the speaking industry. Mm-hmm. And I just went to work again, just reach out, hey, I want to speak, where can I speak? Does anyone out there who knows me know a place I can speak? Yeah. And I spoke at a local wrestling match the first time, didn't know anything about anything really, I was just talking about me, really. Yeah. And then little by little, got better at that and learned that the podcast is a thing, and learned that I had a lot to say. Eventually, I incorporated my love of reading books into my podcast. Mm-hmm. So essentially, I just take everything that I love and think, how can I make a living out of what I love?
Right. And
then I do it. Yeah. And I'm still in those phases right now. Yeah. But how I make my living now is speaking and podcasting. And actually, that's what I spend my time doing. I make my living speaking. Most of my time goes into podcasting, which I don't make any money. But so that was. And
that transition's been definitely well, and still takes that work and that grind.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's well. It's what I know. It's what I do every day. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that someone else could be making a lot more money than I'm making right now, but I'm doing it how I want to do it. I'm really particular about things. I'm trying to build my life such that I spend the most time doing the things that I like to do.
Right.
And of course I do the grunt. Of course I train. Of course I do the mindless work, but I really try to shape it how I want to shape it.
Yeah.
I'm married. I'm happily married. I have 2 kids. I'm able to pay my bills, so I think it's going well.
Yeah. I mean, and then it really encompasses what I think a lot of us are trying to go after, is just doing what we enjoy and find a way to have that monetization or that reward from it as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge misnomer or a huge misunderstanding of how hard it is.
Right.
I mean, I think if a lot of potential is obviously your story, your credibility, mm-hmm. but also social media following.
Right.
And I mean, I have a decent sized following, and it's still hard as heck to get anyone to care about what I have to say.
Right.
So it's really, really, really tough, and I don't think people understand how hard it is.
Right. A lot of people just see the glamour of it as opposed to see the work that goes into to make that.
I mean, day in and day out, you put specifically speaking of podcasting, day in and day, I mean, I've already lesson planned for 2 hours today, and I got more. The rest of the day for a show that I'm going to produce tomorrow that's not going to take in any money.
Right.
Why? Because I believe that in years,
right.
it will bring in a lot of money, and it's doing good for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's giving back in so many ways.
Yeah.
So if you could go back, and I know we touched on it a little bit, but if you could go back to a 15-year-old you and have the opportunity to give yourself some advice, what would that advice look like?
I did a talk in an intermediate school yesterday, and a student asked that advice, and I said to her, I would tell myself not to worry so much. Mm-hmm. Tell myself not to worry so much. And I think maybe, thinking about it in the context of fighting and sports, I learned a direct correlation of hard work and confidence.
Yeah.
For Pros versus Joes. I was on a reality show in between teaching and fighting, mm-hmm. and I saw the direct correlation that I outworked everyone here and I won.
Right.
And when I was younger, even in the college wrestling, it was like I relied too much on emotion, mm-hmm. where it was like that show taught me you don't even have to have any emotion. You just work really hard
right.
until like you're going to die on the treadmill, and then that equals confidence.
Yeah.
You can't not do it. So I haven't mastered that. You know, I did a much better job in fighting to realize that direct correlation. It's the only reason I thought I could beat up Anthony Johnson is because I believed that I worked harder than him. I didn't beat him up, but I thought I could.
Yeah.
So I'd probably tell myself to really learn that correlation.
Yeah. Awesome. So one last thing then would be, you know, what would you say would be the number one thing that the sport in general has taught you up till now?
I think, I mean, that right there,
Yeah.
the idea of hard work and confidence is at the top. But I also think, a really valuable asset for anyone to have is, I mean, the word vulnerable is used a lot, and it can be kind of overused. But when you get your butt kicked, when you get embarrassed,
Yeah.
on TV and everyone sees you at your lowest point, it's really like, oh, phew, that's over with. And you don't have to worry about it happening anymore because you already did it. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay. So now it's like, you know, I don't care. And again, it's a balance, it's a paradox, but it taught me that, like, oh, dude, you already got so embarrassed as you could. So it's all right. It'll be all right tomorrow.
You had that fear, you faced it.
Yeah.
You're done with it. Just keep going.
Yeah, and the same thing with Rumble. I mean, it's that same idea. He's freaking scary. He's a beast, and I fought him, and I'm still alive. You know, and like people that I respect are like, dude, you fought Rumble. It's like, yeah, he's trained and you fight. It's that simple.
Yeah.
So it's really mechanical.
Yeah. Awesome. I definitely appreciate the content and you sitting down with me today. I hope you guys enjoyed the content as well. If you did, please like and subscribe. And remember, whatever it is that you do today, approach it with the mindset of, is this my final play? Thanks a lot.
And I do want to throw in the Spaniard Show on iTunes, whatever podcast app you use. I produce content every single day. You can see it all at charliespaniard.com.
Absolutely. Go ahead and like and subscribe to that as well. And how can we find your book also?
Amazon, Driven, My Unlikely Journey from Classroom to Cage. And I'm glad you said that. I'm actually deep into the process of writing a second book.
Okay. And what's that look like?
It's tentatively we're calling it the world's toughest lifelong learner, but it's about if you can that idea, right? Being a tough human being, not fighting tough, but just a strong human being. But I took the past since fighting. It's essentially a part 2 of my memoir, but it's full of nuggets of books that I read and the interviews that I've done. I think I've done over 100 interviews on my show, so I've got a lot of that knowledge into it too.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead and check that out as well, and I'll set the link underneath as well for you, so you can click on that. And I definitely appreciate you following along. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.